والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله المبعوث رحمة للعالمين. We wanted to focus on a renewed effort of studying the principles of reform and revival as found in the experience of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodi rahmatullahi alayh, given that they speak to a number of different issues which are pertinent to understand, important to understand, and given that the life of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodi rahmatullahi alayhi has such an alignment with the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his da'wah effort. One of the things that is brought up with regard to the effort of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodi is this idea that the environment was experiencing decay and decline, and there was this sense of darkness specifically for those Muslims that wanted to practice. And it is these types of conditions of despair and hardship and challenge which provide us with the opportunity to renewal and revival and rebirth. But in order to be able to address the conditions as they are, there's the necessity for nourishing ourselves and creating an atmosphere which can sustain that effort. Those we call positive forces that present themselves in the face of negative forces. So in the conditions that we experience of decay and degeneration are embedded the conditions for rebirth and regeneration. One of the things that they experienced in that time period was the practice of takhlit. And takhlit had everything to do with mixing the deen in terms of worship, mixing the deen of Islam in terms of worship with practices of superstition and shirk and so on and so forth. And so this necessitated a non-cultural understanding of Islam. It necessitated an actual intentional study of the deen to address this problem, necessitated an actual profound study of the deen. Because, by the way, in the time of Shaykh Uthman bin Fodi rahmatullahi alayhi, the ulama in the environment were part of the problem, because they accepted these types of things into their practices, which by default means that in their education, there was license that was given to these types of things, So there was a necessity to renew an understanding of the deen itself, right? The other issue that comes up is that in the philosophy of tajdeed, it's not only a matter of looking at the foundations of the deen, but also looking at the way that we organize ourselves. Because when we talk about the foundations of the deen, in many instances, we're talking about individual practice. Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Karim al-Maghiri al-Tilmilsani was from the ulama of Al-Jazair. He focused on looking at the responsibilities of the leader So now we have another dimension, right? We have a dimension wherein one, the foundation for the deen is being looked at and studied, and the other dimension is the issue of the leader. What are the responsibilities of the leader? So within the context of West Africa, in the time of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodi, the preoccupation of the Muslims became to renew themselves due to the circumstances. The circumstances were extremely problematic. So rather than fall into despair, the circumstances were used as an opportunity to address life itself. In other words, when you're backed into a corner, there's nowhere that you can go, right? So you have to address the reality that you're dealing with. And this was the question, how do we address the reality that we're dealing with? So one of the things that they did was they began to look at how their understanding of religion was. The second thing that came into play is the role and the responsibility of the leader. And so Muhammad bin Abdul Karim al-Maghili al-Milsani, he was a person that believed in just leadership. He was a person that believed in just leadership. And so the educational front became a very important front to be able to what? To be able to address the realities on the ground. To be able to address the realities on the ground. There's so much in life that can break a people. And these two things, they can definitely break a people. How we understand religion in the face of hardship, trial, tribulation, and how it is that we approach it as far as our relationship with God. And then the other thing that comes up to the fore is how it is that we organize ourselves as a community. What do we expect from leadership? What do we expect from society in terms of the just treatment of people? Right? Those two things have to go together. You can have a religious effort. You can have a spiritual effort. But if in the society you fail to produce the values of religion in terms of respect for human dignity, in terms of being just and equitable to the poor and to the weak, and so on and so forth, then you undermine the whole problem of religious revival. You undermine the whole problem of religious revival. The problem of religious revival is that you're saying that there's a need for it. That's why it's considered a problem. There's a need that has to be addressed. But we undermine that if the religion is not relevant to us in the society, right? Because what begins to happen is that people begin to question why it is that the state of the world is the way that it is, and what is it that we can do. And that's the original reason why there was a sense of need to go back and look at the foundations of the religion, right? And on top of there being the problem of superstition and misunderstanding in terms of religious belief, there was the issue of injustice. So those two fronts, the front of how we understand religion and how we deal in society, they go together. And that is what we learn from as a lesson from the life of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodi. And with this, we end